Hello everybody, welcome to my channel or welcome back if you've been here before. My name is Delia and in today's video, since on the 1st of December, which is hopefully when I'm going to post this, we here in Romania celebrate the day of the country. It's our national day. I thought it would be nice to bring you a list of Romanian authors that I personally like and I think you should give a try if you're interested in seeing what Romanian literature is about. I would recommend these authors to anybody in any context, not just because they're Romanian, but obviously the authors I'll talk about and the works I'll talk about, they all have English translations, so you can find them and read them even if you don't speak Romanian. Now, I know in my last video I promised that this video is going to be the one about Wuthering Heights, but I realized I wanted to give myself more time to work on that because I'd like to read more and I'd like to do an in-depth analysis of that novel. And since there's a lot to read and it's a quite complex novel, I just wanted to give myself more time, so I'll do something that I can be satisfied with. I'm not going to say proud, but satisfied with. And in the meantime, since I'd still like to try to keep up that schedule that I impose on myself of posting once a month, I thought this would be a nice and pretty easy video to do. Easy because it doesn't require a lot of research. That's not to say that I don't care about what I'm going to say or it shouldn't be taken seriously. So, without further ado, let's get into this list. And no list of Romanian authors, I think, could be complete without the one and only Mihai Eminescu. Eminescu is not necessarily one of my favorite authors, but he's such an iconic figure of Romanian literature. It would feel wrong not to include him and not to give him a shout out. Pretty much every Romanian who's been to school should know who Eminescu is because we start reading his poems as soon as we start learning how to read, and we read them all throughout school until the end of high school. So this figure follows you all throughout your school years. And because of that, I think very few people actually read his poems outside of school and try to enjoy his works. And try to enjoy his works, and this was definitely the case for me because when you hear your teacher talking so much about this particular author, you don't really feel like going home and reading something of his in your free time. But nevertheless, I think he has good poems. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve the appreciation he has, definitely, but sometimes it can be too much. He was born around Botoșani, which is very close to where I was born too, so we're basically neighbors, and he lived in the 19th century. His poems and his poetry or his work is part of the Romantic movement, even though he wrote them towards the end or after the Romantic movement was kind of over, so he's considered a late Romantic. But this makes sense because Romania being a smaller country and a country that developed a bit later, it wasn't up to date with the cultural currents that were going on in Europe. So whatever was going on in Europe, it would reach us decades later. Besides him being this author that you have to read for school, another reason I'm not really drawn to his work that much is because of his portrayal of women. He was a bit misogynistic, but again, I mean, and I'm not going to hold it against him because who wasn't in the 19th century? But yes, women in his poems are generally outside of Lucifer or the Evening Star, which I would recommend you read. I would say this is the first poem I'd recommend you read, and I'll talk about it in just a moment. But outside of that, usually women figures are this angelic kind of childish being that is there for the poet to project this ideal love and to be an outlet for his genius. And I never really quite liked that passive role they have, because obviously as a woman I'm not going to see myself in the male voice of the poet. I'm much likely to see myself in the women figures that appear in his poems. But in the Evening Star, that's not as present. So the Evening Star or Lucifer is an epic poem about the story of a girl who falls in love with the star. And their attempt at trying to do something about that, but finding it impossible because Neither of them want to give up or to leave their world for their love. I've mentioned this in my previous video too. I also said it has a lot of interpretations, and I don't want to get into that because it's not a video about Eminescu. But I would like to read you some verses from this poem because I think they are pretty nice. I'll read 4 stanzas that showcase what I was telling you, that neither of them want to give up their world in order to go to their love. My treasure, oh, my peerless love, come, leave thy world aside. I am the morning star on high, and thou shalt be my bride. In coral palaces we'll live, for long, long ages there. In ocean's kingdom, queen of all, thou shalt be everywhere. So beautiful and bright thou art, as only angels are. But to thy kingdom, on that way, I'll never go so far. So strange in bearing and in words, so lifeless are thy rays, for I am living, thou art dead, and freezing is thy gaze. The English translation doesn't sound as good as the Romanian one for me personally, but I think this is a pretty good translation, and I definitely recommend reading this poem because it's beautiful and it deserves being known. Let's move on to the next author, and the next author I'll talk about is actually one of my favorite authors of all time, and that is Liviu Rebreanu. Now, Liviu Rebreanu was born at the end of the 19th century. He was born in Bistrița, and the novel I'm going to recommend you read from them is also one of his most famous novels. So, if you would like to give Liviu Rebreanu a try, I recommend you read The Forest of the Hanged, which has been translated into English by Alice V. Wise. Critics say that this is his best novel, and I also personally really liked it, and it's more touching when you know that it is based on a true story. And I'll give you some background on that. So, as I said, Rebreanu was born in Bistrița. So when he was born, before the First World War, Transylvania, or the region with the vampires, was not part of Romania. It was part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Now, there were a lot of Romanians living on that territory, but they were just not. But it was just not part of Romania as a country, and because of that, in the First World War, a lot of families found themselves fighting against each other because you had some members who were fighting for the Austro-Hungarian Empire, some members who were fighting for the Romanian army, and maybe they didn't fight each other directly, but Romanian people from Transylvania were put into this difficult position of fighting against their kin. And this was a situation with Rebreanu's brother, Emil Rebreanu, who was a soldier in the empire's army. He wanted to go to the other side and to help the Romanian army, and he tried to do that. He tried to flee, but unfortunately he was unsuccessful. He was caught. He was accused of fleeing and betraying the Austro-Hungarian army and was executed by hanging. After the war, Liviu was his younger brother, found out what happened to his brother, and this for him sparked the idea of the Forest of the Hanged. So the Forest of the Hanged takes place in First World War period, and it does describe this position some Romanians found themselves in during that time. Why it's called the Forest of the Hanged, you might ask. Well, I'm not sure if this actually happened, but in the novel, in order to deter Romanians from fleeing and from betraying the Austro-Hungarian army, they would take the bodies of the ones executed for betrayal and they would hang them in the forest around the battlefield. So when the army would go to the forest, they would see bodies of the traitors hanging from the trees. So it's by no means an easy read, and you have to keep that in mind when you go into this novel, but it gives you a window into a Romanian perspective of the First World War. And more than that, I think it's a good novel. So if you're not very interested in history, I just think it's a good novel and it deserves my recommendation. Let's move on from the terrors of the First World War to a more lighter stuff, which is anti-Semitism. Because the next author I'll talk about is Mihail Sebastian, which is the pseudonym for his real name, Joseph Mendel and to be honest, I don't know how to pronounce this name. I looked it up. I found the French pronunciation, which is Hechter, I think you could also pronounce it Hechter, I don't know. Either way, so he was Jewish author who was born at the beginning of the 20th century, and he was active and he wrote around the interwar period. The problem with him being Jewish is that Romania, before the Second World War and the beginning of the Second World War, sided with Germany and adopted a lot of their ideology and started to discriminate against Jewish people. If you look on lists of what countries took part in the Holocaust, Romania is one of them. For Mihail Sebastian, and I'll just use his pseudonym because that's how he's known as a writer. So for him, he wasn't allowed to show his plays in the theater, because as well as novels, he also wrote plays, and that's why he chose to write under a pseudonym. And there's a funny, not kind of sad, but also a funny story about him and another Romanian author who was called Camil Petrescu. So at some point, the authorities, because of trying to get rid of the Jewish population, authorities started to take Jewish people's properties and give them to other people. And in Bucharest, they would take apartments, beautiful big apartments, and give them to people who weren't Jewish. And this author, Camil Petrescu, it is said, I'm not entirely sure how true this story is, but it is said, and I've heard it in multiple places, that he, while this was happening, he meets with Mihail Sebastian on the street one day, and starts to complain to him that he wasn't able to get any of these apartments that were taken away from Jewish people. Of course, fully knowing that Mihail Sebastian was Jewish and that he was the one discriminated against for the benefit of the others. So I think it's important to remember that about him and read his works because of that, but not only because of that. Again, it's an author I genuinely like and I would genuinely recommend. And as opposed to Rebreanu, his works are really a bit lighter. So his story isn't, but most of his works are not tragic. So if you're interested in theater, a play that I really like is The Star Without a Name, or as for a novel, if you want to try a novel, one that I think it's perfect for this period, for winter and for the winter holiday, is The Accident, which is about a woman who has an accident, and this accident snowballs into other things that would change her life. And it all takes place during winter. At some point, she goes to a cabin in the mountains and she skis. So the novel is really nice, and the atmosphere is also perfect for this time of year. But if you're interested in finding out about more about his experience as a Jewish man in a country which sided with Nazi Germany in the Second World War, then you might want to read For 2000 Years, which was translated by an Irish author and translator, and I hope I'm not going to mispronounce his name, Philip O'Calla. This is a diary written by Mihail Sebastian, and it is about the experience of Jewish people and his experience as a Jewish person and living in a country that discriminated against him. So again, another author that I think it's important because of who he was, but also whose works are quite emblematic for Romanian literature. Speaking of minorities and discrimination, the next author I'll talk about is Herta Müller. I'm a bit reluctant in calling Herta Müller a Romanian author because she's more a German Romanian author. She was born in Romania, but she was born in a German community, and her first language is German. She learned Romanian in school, and she also moved in Germany and she lives there. So she's not just a Romanian author, she's a German Romanian author. But I would say people in Romania claim her. I think it's mainly because she won the Nobel Prize in 2009. She was also discriminated and persecuted, this time by the communist regime, because she refused to work with the secret services or the security, as we as it used to be called. When the communists and the Soviets came in Romania after the Second World War, they deported a lot of people. Some of those people were German minorities, and this is what happened to her mother. So she was deported and she lived in a concentration camp in Ukraine, if I remember correctly. And it is her mother's experience that gave her the inspiration for one of her most famous novels, which in English I found as The Hunger Angel, but in Romanian it has quite a different title. It is called Leagănul Respirației, which I would translate as The Breath Swing, or The Swing of Breath. So this is a novel tackling life in a concentration camp, and I would say as a structure is quite similar to Dostoevsky's House of the Dead, because you have chapters about different aspects of how life goes in a concentration camp, like, I don't know, what kind of work you do, what food you eat, and so on. Again, not an easy read as opposed to Sebastian's novels. This is not an easy read, but very interesting, and it does give you another window into seeing how much people actually suffered around those periods, which were so chaotic. All right, let's move on to the next author. The fifth author I'll talk about is maybe our most famous contemporary author, and his name is Mircea Cărtărescu. He had multiple nominalizations for the Nobel Prize of Literature. He didn't win any of them. Regardless of that, I think he's a pretty good author. His works are mainly in the genre of magical realism. And I have two recommendations to make here. So the first one is Nostalgia, which is a collection of novellas. Or if you'd like a full novel, you have one of his latest novels, which is called Solenoid, which is a novel that I think started when he asked himself the question, what would have happened if I weren't a successful writer? Because Solenoid is about a teacher who wants to be a writer, but is not, but fails at becoming successful. So he has to live this mediocre life of going to school, dealing with all sorts of naughty students, while he's still wanting to write. I really liked this author in high school. Now, I don't know, I'm just not as inclined to reading him. I don't know, for no particular reason. It's not like he did something problematic or anything like that. I just think I'm not as drawn to that genre as I was back then. But I still think so. If you're into magical realism and into things that are a bit weirder, just give Cărtărescu a try. We're getting now to our last author, and that is Ana Blandiana, which is a pseudonym for Otilia Valeria Rosan. So she is a writer. She's written novels and poems. She chose to write under this pseudonym Ana Blandiana because she was persecuted by the communist regime, like Müller was. The reason why she was persecuted was because her father was a priest, and communism didn't quite agree with religion, and her father refused, like Herta Müller did, her father refused to cooperate with the secret services, and he was framed for having a gun and arrested as a political prisoner for many years. And the issue with that is that back then, once you had a member of your family who had this black mark on them, it would impact everybody else. So she was denied entry in university a few times. One time she got to classroom with her exam paper in front of her, and then some people came and took her out because she wasn't allowed to get into university. Eventually she managed to study philology in Cluj, if I remember it correctly. Found two collections that have her works, and that is The Shadow of Words, and 5 books. So these collections include, I think, almost all of her poems, and they are all translated by Paul Scott Derrick and Viorica Patea. So if you're interested in reading some of her poems, definitely give them a try. Now, my favorite poem of hers, and this is just because it was the one I read when I was young, has a poem about a cat called Arpajik, which in English is Chive, although Chive doesn't sound as cute as Arpajik. It's a very cute poem for kids, written about this cat and all of the shenanigans he gets into. Sometimes I go back to that poem and I don't know, it makes me feel like a child again, and I really like it. But I like some of her other poems, and like with Eminescu, I'd like to read one of them to you. And since winter is coming, I'll read to you a poem called Snow. It's snowing, and it means I'll see you, because your invisible shape will take on form beneath the flakes. So please, stand still and let it fall on your shoulders, your head, your hair. I only want to see you there. I really do. I know I can't caress you. My hand is warm and would melt your snowy form. Yes, snow is falling from eternal ice, and the coldness bathes us in its warm, consoling disaster. And this concludes my list of six Romanian authors that I think you should try. When I started this channel, I didn't plan to speak so much about Romanian authors, but then I realized after finishing my master's degree and studying a lot of English and American authors, I realized I really missed getting into Romanian literature. Because obviously it's something that's very near and dear to my heart. But also, again, I know I'm biased, but also I think these authors are genuinely good authors, and I think it's worth giving them a shout out, trying to convince other people to give them a try. So regardless of whether or not, well, if you're interested in Romanian literature and a bit of Romanian history, you'll get that, because literature, of course, is an encapsulation of culture. But also, if you feel like you want some ideas of what you could read this winter, I think these are also good recommendations, depending on what you want. So do you want to read about the horrific events that happened during war, or do you want something lighter like Mihail Sebastian's The Accident? If you care to leave me a comment, tell me which one would you like to try, or if you've read any of these authors or any other Romanian authors, I'd like to hear what you thought about them. That being said, this is the end of my video, so thank you for watching, and I hope you'll give any of these recommendations a try, and I also hope you'll stick around for my next video, which will be on Wuthering Heights. So that is coming. I'll keep my promise. I just need a bit more time for research. I was Delia, this was my video, and hopefully I'll see you in my next one. Bye!